One, shalom, and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malaman in Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. And with me, as usual, my good friends, the newly minted Rabbi Dr. Barry Chesler and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky on Sheikh Chesed in New York City. Rabbi Barry Chesler, Dr. Barry Chesler is in Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island. It's great to see you. Mazel Tov, Barry.
Thank you very much.
How did it go?
It went extremely well, and it was an effective use of Zoom, so I was very pleased.
You were sanctifying the Zoom waves. You sanctified Zoom.
We did.
And speaking of sanctifying Zoom, we are sanctifying Zoom too by discussing Torah. We're rounding the corner on almost a year of Zoom Parsha Talks, which has been just phenomenal. This week, we have an amazing Parsha. Not that last week was less amazing or next week. Well, next week maybe. I don't know. But Yitro, this Parsha is just a phenomenal Parsha because not only do we really encounter this extraordinary character Yitro, but let's face it, we encounter the God of Israel, the Ribbono Shel Olam.
Greater than Yitro.
He's even greater than Yitro. Ma'amad Har Sinai, Matan Torah, is in this Parsha. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, let's talk about Yitro. Here the Parsha opens and tells us, Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Choten Moshe. The Parsha introduces Midyan. We know him because he's Moses' father-in-law, but he hears the priest of Midian, father-in-law of Moshe, Et kol asher asa Elohim de Moshe uli Yisrael. He hears about everything that God has done to Moses and Israel, the people. Ki hotzi Adonai et Yisrael miMitzrayim, for God has taken Israel out of Egypt. So we were talking about how do you think he hears? A, B, what does he hear? So the mechanism of communication and the content. Barry, how do you think?
I asked a question because I think a perplexing question. And what drives the point home for me is that he hears that God led the Israelites out of Egypt. But what did he hear that God actually did? Right? We have this invisible God, so everything is stripped away from him. He hears a report that the Israelites have left Egypt, and it's attributed to God. And I imagine it must perplex him, because how does it work? Unless we subscribe to one of the early biblical criticism theories that Yitro himself was a worshiper of the God of Israel at Mount Sinai. But it is kind of, as I said, it is kind of perplexing.
I mean, I don't understand. What do you mean? He's perplexed by the.
So, there's a point I think I've made before. We're so used to reading the book that we don't think about what actually happens in real life. In real life, you don't see God. So when it says God took them out of Egypt, so that reads very nicely on the page, but what is the experience of Yitro? How does he know it's the God of Israel? Okay. He knows that the Israelites have left Egypt, obviously. Uh-huh. But what else does he know? And why does he attribute it to God? And how does he actually hear? Do we think an Egyptian heard and ran and told him that some Midianite was wandering around and said, oh my God, there's 2 million Israelites on the march?
All right. Jeremy, you want to weigh on this question? I mean, just in terms of the content, or I want to ask you then, from what the Torah reports about Yitro, can we make anything out about his character? What kind of person is he, and his response to this information?
Well, first of all, I always, wonder about medieval times and ancient times and biblical and even further ancient times, how they knew anything. I'm always like, just my imagination just runs wild when I think, what did it mean that people heard about things, and what did it mean that so and so was famous? And one knows that, like in the Middle Ages, like the Rambam was famous all over the Jewish world, but how did anybody know these things? And how are those things considered reliable? I think of Yitro as an extremely positive character, and Vayichad Yitro, it says at one point, he's delighted in what's going on. And I think there is a kind of ecumenism, a kind of world spirituality that is manifest in Yitro, that even though the relationship and the brit between the God of Israel and the people of Israel is not one that he is himself, integrated into, the people in the ancient world who worshipped, and he is known as, also Reuel in another place, and Chovav the dear one, and Reuel, God's friend. Yitro represents to me the possibility of a kind of international culture of recognizing, like Melchizedek in Breshit, of people who are not in our group per se, but with whom we travel, and we share in our different ways some relationship to the God of the cosmos, the Ribono Shel Olam.
I want to go back to the very beginning when we first meet Yitro. Moshe has watered the flocks for his daughters, and they come back early, and he asks why they're home, and they say that this nice Egyptian helped us water our flocks, and Yitro's response is, so where is he? And immediately he demonstrates Hachnasat Orchim, the welcoming the guest. He breaks bread, and he's going to break bread with him later in the Parsha again. He is a companion, the one with whom you break bread. And he's an important model, as Jeremy mentioned, because he does recall for us Melchizedek.
By the way, he's wise. He's no dummy. And in fact, Moshe proves the value of the great teaching of Rabbi Tarfon from Pirkei Avot is Ezu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam. And I think that Yitro represents that, the counterweight to whatever instinct we might have about saying, let's remain insular in our culture. The wisdom comes from within us. And Yitro says, you know what, why don't you learn from some people who might not at first glance seem like they have anything to teach you, but in point of fact, Yitro organizes Am Yisrael to be a more just society because Moshe, in all of his wisdom, has not helped tzedek filter down. He's been a source of tzedek himself, but he hasn't set it up so that other people can experience it. Yitro comes along and says, this is not, first of all, you're going to wear yourself out. And Elliot has a great comment about the interpersonal dimension about what it is that he says, but he also structurally creates the possibility of a society that manifests more tzedek. Why don't you tell us about the interpersonal element?
I want to make a point that says that Yitro is possibly a model of a phyllo-Semite. I mean, these are anachronistic terms here, but he is someone who truly admires and respects the Jewish people. Also an anachronism here. The people of Israel, and the God of Israel. He speaks to the God or of the God of Israel in very personal terms, using the name of God. Baruch Adonai asher hitzil etchem. Blessed is the Lord who has saved you from Paro. And he makes the feast. He makes an olah uzvachim. And these are very intimate rituals with the people and with God. And I think the Torah is okay with that. The Torah is really okay with an outsider coming in at the boundary of the Israelite experience and sharing in solidarity with their experience. And then at the end of the story, he will move out. But of course, what happens in the direct when he has that immediate experience with Moshe is absolutely fascinating. And for lots of reasons, that the text itself is just so compressed and poetic. You remember how we said in Breshit, God bless the narrator. This is one of those stories where the narrative joy is so reflective of how they talk to each other, what the poetry of Yitro and what he says. And the reference, listen to this. I'll give you a quiz here. Lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh. Question: where is the only other place in the Torah where the expression lo tov is found? Right?
Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden. What's the same here between Garden of Eden and the experience?
Back in the Garden of Eden, when the human is first created, midrashically speaking, I bet a lot of our thousands of listeners don't know this, but midrashically speaking, the first human is created a Janus face hermaphrodite. Lo tov heyot adam levado. It's not good for a person to be alone. According to midrash, means I can't make this hermaphrodite. I have to make them people who need each other to continue life, male and female. And but even apart from that, let's take it in the way I think most of our listeners are accustomed to thinking, that there was this human male, and lo tov hayot adam levado. There's something missing if people are all by themselves, all self-sufficient. We need to be people who need, as Barbara Streisand said, people who need people, and we have to. You can't.
He actually didn't say it, Jeremy. I think she's saying it.
She's saying it, yes. People need other people.
Okay, so let's cut to the chase.
But I want to add something here, Jeremy, just to piggyback on your point. And so man, it's not good for man to be alone. And what happens in chapter 2 of Bereshit is woman is created. And Yitro is blessed with 7 daughters. And I think because of that, his fate and his future is tied up in the destiny of the families of his sons-in-law, of whom Moshe, from our point of view, is the prominent one. And so he has a certain solicitude for Moshe as the husband of his daughter Tzipporah, and by extension with Moshe's people, which is our people.
Right. And so therefore he is very concerned when he sees Moshe from morning to night, dealing with the people, adjudicating their little stupid cases, like you didn't return my, tallis bag, and you're muted.
Another anachronism.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you didn't, and you stole this from me, and you owe me a piece of gum. And Moshe's dealing with all these little things, and Yitro's going like, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. And the reason why he sees it insane is, I think, twofold. One, he says, you're going to go crazy. And two, more importantly, my daughter is never going to see you. You're going to be spending from dawn to dusk and beyond dealing with these people, and you're not going to have a life. And now we understand that Moshe is, has to be devoted to the people, and that she buys into this. But that's a huge, huge price. And I think he has Rahmanis. He's a father. The text overwhelmingly emphasizes Yitro Choten Moshe. How many times this is repeated? 6, 7 times. Yitro Choten Moshe. Yitro Chotno, his father-in-law. Why? Because there's a relationship.
Ani chotencha ba'ilecha.
Yeah.
I am your father-in-law.
Moshe,
I am your father-in-law.
Okay.
So he's saying essentially, there's perhaps a little bit of self-interest in there, Elliot, because he's saying, okay, you've had 2 children, Gershom and Eliezer. I want some grandchildren.
Exactly.
Go home to your wife. Give me some grandchildren.
All right. So now,
the lesson we might mention here that Moshe apparently does not learn, as will be picked up in Sefer Bamidbar.
Before we get to that, so at take the last line of the story. The last line of the story is Vayishalach. He appoints all these people, a whole legislative branch. Vayishalach Moshe et chotno vayelech lo le'eretz. So I read that line. Moses sends him away. He sends his father-in-law vayelech lo le'eretz, and his father and Yitro goes by himself for himself back to his land. Right. So I want to unpack that. And I want to say that part of this is about Yitro having his own life, and part of this is about Moshe needing to be the leader. Because Yitro, before this, Yitro is a mentor. Jeremy, yeah, absolutely. We respect the wisdom that comes from everywhere. And Yitro has a lot of wisdom to impart to Moshe, but Moshe can't function in his shadow.
Well, because Yitro ultimately is a family man. That's why I think in part he's identified consistently as Moshe's father-in-law. But Moshe sees himself not as a family man, but as a national leader. And here it might be worth thinking a little bit about the names of his 2 sons, Gershom and Eliezer. Gershon because I was a stranger in a strange land, which we often think of as Egypt, but I think that also might refer to his time in Midian.
Yeah.
And from the beginning of his time in Midian, he's identified as Yitro's son-in-law. So there's already a little bit of dissonance between Moshe and Yitro. And then the second son, his name is Eliezer because God saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. And that harkens back to Moshe's past. Moshe doesn't really see himself as a family person. And it may be that the tragedy of great leaders is they can't function in both worlds.
So take a second if you want to contrast them. Why is Moshe not a patriarch then? Moshe is never identified as a patriarch. Moshe is always Rabbeinu in later Judaism, of course, but Moshe is really not family. I think that's a very important insight here.
Well, you can't be a family man. We belong to a profession where in another generation, the classic rabbi was the type A personality, who was devoted to the synagogue, and the family bore the burden of that. And I think there's something similar to that here. For Moshe really to be Moshe, he has to stand alone.
We really never hear of Tzipporah until into Bamidbar. We never hear of the children.
You never hear of the children, and he brings them back. Achar shilucheha, after she was sent away. Moshe is consistently trying to have exactly that thing, having that sense of aloneness from the family, and it is part of the tragedy of leadership, and we have it in Bamidbar, in Parshat Behalotecha, with the episode of the Ethiopian woman, which it's not clear whether that means Tzipporah or some other wife, and the Midrashic tradition and the Parshanut tradition is divided between whether when Aaron and Miriam complain about Moshe, whether it's because he married a second wife or because he was celibate from the wife and inflicted suffering on the wife, because inflicted suffering on Tzipporah because he was all business all the time and did not have a sexual marital relationship with her.
And it also gives a little bit of pathos here to when Moshe appears before Paro and says, Shalach et ami, send forth my people. And in effect, what he's saying to Pharaoh is, I did it because I sent away my wife and kids. You could send away my people as well.
By the way, in Kabbalah, because there's a specific Kabbalistic reference to this, about the relationship of Moshe representing Tiferet and the Shekhinah, the feminine face of God, is Tfilah Moshe, Ish HaElohim, the husband of God. So in Kabbalistic sense, it has a meaning about the male and female within the divine, but I think it's also an illustrative comment about the character of Moshe, who's kind of married to God. And
I think what you're missing here, Jeremy, is that Ish Elohim, Moses was the first doctor of divinity.
There we go. Okay, Vayisume Refidim, we move on from this episode. Vayavo Midbar Sinai, they get to the Sinai desert. Vayachanu Bamidbar, they camp in the desert. Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar. Jeremy, they singularly camp.
Oh, they do. Those listeners who are astute about Hebrew grammar know that those first three verbs were all plural verbs. They traveled, they came, they camped, they, and then it's Israel, singular noun, singular verb, camped before the mountain. And the wonderful midrash on that is that it was only when they became Lev Echad and Am Echad. They used to be they were divided, they weren't connected, they weren't unified. Only when they became a single heart were they a single nation, were they ready for revelation. And that's just one of the home run Hall of Fame midrashim.
So I would put that in the top 10. Yeah,
for sure.
Well, so including in the categories of top 10 great psukim, we have this passage. Atem ri'item asher asiti leMitzrayim. You saw what I did to Egypt. Ba'asa'etchem al kanfei nesharim. I brought you on eagle's wings. V'avietchem elai. I brought you to me. If you listen to my voice and guard the covenant, you will be my treasure among the people. For the land is mine. You will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So, Jeremy, we used to do this class, the Jewish mission. We never did this as the mission text, but really,
Oh, it could be, should be.
it could be. It definitely could be one of the mission texts. Okay, so many places to really interpret here. I have a chiddush. I'm going to save it I'm going to do the punchline of my chiddush. I'll see what you think about it. But give me Mamlechet Kohanim, Barry.
Well, it's a kingdom of priests, and it belies a certain tension in the life of all religious people, perhaps, that we want to be close to God, which we identify perhaps with the priest, who is a servant in the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, the holy tabernacle or the holy sanctuary of God, and being a regular person, someone on the fringes, as it were. And God is a businessman. He comes here with a deal, and he knows how to negotiate. And he wants to raise the people up, figuratively and literally. They're supposed to go up to Mount Sinai, I think is one way to understand the unfolding of the story. And God is going to come down to meet them halfway. And there's a physical image, and there's also a metaphysical image, as it were, a theological image, that God wants a partnership. He wants to make the people something, but they have to join him. God cannot do it himself. And sometimes, maybe often, we overlook that central fact of religious life, that God requires us as much as we require God.
This verse is all about partnership. I know, Jeremy, you have
It's all about Brit. This is the place where Jewish theology is most clearly, exactly as Barry said, that Brit is a religious orientation that is not, God is all powerful and human beings are just, there's a way in which that's true, that God is the potter and we're just nothing but clay to be manipulated. There's a way in which that's part of our spiritual repertoire as well. But the deepest Jewish theme is covenantal. We form a community that binds together in the human realm and that is oriented towards the divine realm, and that there are demands and expectations, and we are shutafim lakadosh baruch hu b'ma'aseh bereshit. We are God's partners. And so this passage about, I need you to do this. I love you. You are am segula to me. But I need you to become a kingdom of priests. And I think the Kohanim here maybe is best translated as servants, right? Not servants in the sense of like, I need you to mop the floor, but people who are, we know that we leave avdut to Mitzrayim, we leave servitude to Egypt, but we come kirvanu hamakom la'avodato. We come to servitude, from servitude to a tyrant to servitude to the God who is liberating, and that's what Brit is all about.
It's all about relationship. So here's my chiddush, okay? So I was really trying to focus on the image of kanfei nisharim, on eagle's wings. So whether it's above, whether the fledglings are above the wings or below the wings. So the image is so striking. Bnei Israel carries with them a box that has two kruvim on it, the two cherubs, and the cherubs have their arms like wings over the box. And Israel carries the covenant underneath the wings of the kruvim. So in a sense, the carrying of the covenant is an inversion of this image. That God carries Israel al kafei Hashem, and we carry the covenant tachat kanfei Hashem. Okay, judges?
That's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Okay, get 2 thumbs up with that one. All right, 10 Commandments time. We have 5 minutes to do the 10 Commandments.
I don't think
the commandment. Okay, listen, don't kill. That's my one thing to tell you. Just don't kill anybody.
Don't kill, don't do evil in the name of God. Lo tisa. What about, wait. We can't ignore the poetry. Har Sinai ashan kulo, the billowing smoke of the mount, ba'esh. Ya'al ashano ashena kifshan. Lots of beautiful synonyms, assonance there. Anyway, okay, lots of sound, lots of light.
They ro'im et hakolot, and the people see. There's a wonderful psychedelic moment. You know, somebody was taking some, I don't know what. They ate some funny mushrooms, but they saw the sound.
Okay, I want to hone in. The middle point of the Ten Commandments is Shabbat. If you count the words and divide by 2, it's Shabbat. Shabbat is.
Okay, so Martin Buber has this beautiful interpretation of the Ten Commandments. So he finds 12 commandments in what we call the Ten Commandments. There are 5 laws, breaking the 3rd commandment into 3 different commandments before Shabbat, and then there's Kabed et Avicha v'Imecha, in order that you shall live in the land, and then the 5 social negatives, don't murder, steal, etc. And so what Buber says is the first set of commandments, the first 5, lead us to sanctify or consecrate time, and then space, consecrated space, is going to depend on those 5 later commandments. And so the 2 commandments that leap out are the 2 that are cast in the positives, Zachor, Yom HaShabbat, and Kabed et Avicha v'Imecha.
Fascinating. Okay, what about? So we get Shabbat as a central commandment. We get obviously the social commandments. We've given the commandments. They see it. They have this experience. Vayanu, vayamdu merachok. Jeremy, they go back.
They run away. You know, to me, this is a really intense pasuk about the human spiritual inclination. We all the time, you know, learn how to live in the world in a normal way. We ignore certain things that enable us to function healthily and normally and help us get up in the morning. You know, we all know that we're going to die, and we compartmentalize and we don't think about it. For those of us who are believers, we know that there is a God in the world, a realm of cosmic meaning. And, you know, sometimes you just got to get up and mow the lawn and cook breakfast, and you don't want to think all this. But sometimes heavens open up. You know, the prophet Ezekiel begins, the heavens opened up, I saw visions of God, and I freaked out. And you have this moment here where the people have been brought to Sinai, they've been taken out of Egypt, they've been brought to Mount Sinai, it's smoking, it's trembling, it's terrifying. And they encounter the divine breaking through the distance that we normally place, and they run away, and they can't handle it. It's not that I'm blaming them, because of course it overwhelms them. I'm not saying that if I was there, I would have been tougher. But I think that the Torah is recording one of the features of human spirituality, that to encounter God is to like be taken out of normal human existence. And the people run away, and Moshe says, no, don't run away. Don't run away. And they say, no, we cannot handle it. You talk to God. You tell us what God says. We're running away. And then this little passage ends. Nigash Moshe el ha'arafel asher sham ha'elohim. Moses draws near to the dense darkness where the divine is. To me, that is a symbol of the spiritual master. The true spiritual master is able to bear and draw near to the divine in a way that, like, normal people are kind of, it's a bit of a failure of nerve on their part.
Well, you called it spiritual heroism, that the leader, that, and look at the arc of where Moshe has come, not only from the beginning of the book of Shemot, but from the beginning of this Parsha. You know, guy who's, dealing with, lost objects, and now he has to enter heaven. There's a spiritual audacity or a spiritual heroism here. And that's, where our Parsha is drawing to a conclusion. We get a small coda here. But I don't know, Barry, you want to just...
I wanted to add one thing to what Jeremy said. So we began by talking about the singularity of the Am, and how there's a movement from the people as individuals into one community to prepare them for the revelation at Mount Sinai. One might think that being in such a massive community together for one experience, that the people would derive chizuk from each other. But instead, in a sense, each of them stands alone before God. And the only one who could actually bear that is Moshe. And that really, I think, as Jeremy suggested, is Moshe's greatness, is that he can bear that, whereas mere mortals cannot.
Next week, by the way, at the end of Parshat Mishpatim, we're heretical conservative rabbis. We know that these texts have histories and they have splices and they don't all seem to flow smoothly. In Yitro, Exodus 20, and then at the end of Parshat Mishpatim, Exodus 24, it's not exactly clear how it all fits together. Moshe's up and down and up and down. He's giving messages. He's relaying to the guys, relaying to the people. And then at the end of Mishpatim, Moshe and Aaron, I'm thinking to myself, where's Aaron when everyone's running away? Nadav and Avihu and 70 elders come up and they have a feast and they see God, Vayechezu Elohim, they see God. And so later on in Mishpatim, we do have a kind of a more expansive group of people, at least, who can bear this otherwise unbearable spiritual revelation. But right now, it's portrayed as all the people, all the is just freaked out, and they say in some level, to Elia, what you were saying. Okay, can you please give us, Baba Metzia and what to do when we're fighting over that's my coat. No, that's my coat. That's in some sense an easier form of religion than the heavens open up and I see visions of the Lord.
I was reading recently in the book of Kings, the word Arafel appears there when King Solomon inaugurates the tabernacle, and he has to go into the Arafel, and it's not an accident that these two words are appearing. Of course, the tabernacle is the attempt to reproduce Sinai, but I think it's we're left. The Parsha leaves us with this amazing image. Moshe is the solitary leader, and yet Moshe is very much in relationship. He's in this not conflict, but in the tension of all of these different relationships, and the people now exist, as we have said, in this very unique relationship with the Master of the universe. Right? Atem tiyu li, you will be for me, and if this parsha doesn't really explain that, express that, demonstrate, I don't know what does. This is where it all comes together. And this is a good place where we can hold everyone in suspense for the acceptance of the covenant. And
Amen.
of course, all the details, which will come next week. In the meantime, we are in the middle of this snowstorm. We're at the end of it. We're wishing everybody a beautiful Shabbat. Thank you all for listening and watching us. We really appreciate it. We're somewhere in the hundreds now of viewers and listeners between all our different communities. So we're just delighted that you spend this time with us. We thank you for this. Send us your emails. We'll promise to get back to you. And we enjoy just everything, all the communication. We enjoy this time with you together. In the meantime, have a wonderful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. From
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.